Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming on a Friday lunchtime. As you're all settling in, I'll just make a couple of the logistical announcements. My name's Casper ter Kuile. I'm a student here at the Divinity School. And for those of you coming from outside HDS, welcome. Really good to have you here. A big thank you to Erica. Where is she hiding? There she is. And the Buddhist community here at HDS for co-hosting this event. And also to the HDS religious nuns, not nuns as in kind of nuns in habits, but nuns as in non-religious people. Thank you so much for doing all of that work. Big thanks to Bob as well, who's filming us. So mostly the camera will be focused on Lawrence, but it may sweep around. So maybe best to sit over there if you really don't want to be on camera. What we'll do today is Lawrence spoke at the business school and at the law school over the last 2 days, which was very much in presentation mode, and I know many of you were in the audience for those events. So today it's really more of a conversation. And when Lawrence and I were kind of talking through these events, he said, well, I really want to be challenged a little bit, so please don't hold back. That's absolutely welcome. So we're really thrilled to have Lawrence Levy and his wife Hilary Brooke Levy over there, who are both co-founders of Juniper, based out in California. As you'll probably know, Lawrence has a career in the legal world. He was a graduate of the law school here, and then in the tech sector and finance out in California, ending up as CFO of Pixar animation studios. So really kind of in the deep end of the business world. And then decided to bring some of what he'd learned in those places, but really guided by questions as well, to kind of learn about the traditions of meditation and all sorts of things, which we'll learn more about as well. But has ended up really at the forefront of this idea of meditation practice in a different language, more in the secular world or in the modern world. And what the conversation today is going to be about is what are the opportunities of that in terms of bringing it into the modern world, particularly perhaps the corporate sphere, but also what are the dangers, what are the things which can go wrong. So it's really fun to have some Buddhist colleagues here as well. So I hope it'll be a fruitful dialogue. So what I'm going to do is just ask Lawrence a couple of questions to start with, and then we'll pass the mic around for folks who have questions, and I'll hand the mic of power to you. Does that sound all right? Great. Food is going to come around 1 p.m. There was a slight mix-up with food ordering, so I'm not sure it'll be enough for all of us, but by some miracle it may be. But there should be some food. There should be some food here at 1 p.m. So feel free to go up and get that when that does arrive.
And just to clarify,
yes.
Your question will be heard, but you will not be seen when you ask it. You will not be on camera.
The perfect mix of presence and absence. Thank you, Bob. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for coming, first of all, into the blizzardy New England weather. I'd love to hear just a brief sense of what brought you to the meditation practice that's foundational for you now, from kind of at the moment where you were inside the boardroom and thought, no, I don't want to be president of Pixar, I want to go and learn about meditation.
Very happy to answer that. Sound is okay? Everyone can hear? Okay. Before I answer that, though, let me just say how privileged I am to be here at the Divinity School. And I'll tell you why. So yesterday I gave a talk at the law school, and the day before I gave a talk at the business school. Those both represent the worlds that I come from. So I had 20 years in the hard-edged world of business and law in Silicon Valley. And it was just incredible for me to go back into those worlds and deliver the kind of talk that I gave, which covers both my business and law career, but really goes into the Juniper side and the meditation side. Returning to the law school to do that yesterday after 30 years was just a really special moment for me. But the thing is, I'm kind of a Divinity School guy now. So, and I'll tell you how I know that, because I had dinner, Hillary and I had dinner with Casper 2 nights ago when we got here. And I asked Casper, I said, tell me about the courses you're taking this semester. So he tells me about all his courses, and I'm like, I want to take that course. I want to take that course. I want to take that course. So I kind of feel like maybe this is sort of my root and home now. And I guess it got that way because I always really had an interest and a passion for, I guess what I would loosely call sort of spiritual philosophy, the meaning of life, those kinds of things. Even when I was in law school here 30 years ago, I'd be kind of in the floor of the used bookstores in Harvard Square looking at the 3 books on meditation that existed in Cambridge at that moment in time. But I never really had a chance to explore it. My career took off. I was married. We had a family. It was just really, fast-paced and intense. But I never lost the interest. And the longer that I was in my career, and maybe one of the reasons that what I brought to my work as well is that I loved what I did. I loved being a lawyer. I loved being a business executive, the opportunities I had, the things that I did. I even explained at the law school I was one of those guys that took great pride in drafting like a 75-page legal contract from whole cloth. So I appreciated it all, but I also began to see a kind of, I guess what I would call like a one-dimensionality to it. I just saw a lot of people who allowed that sort of life to define who they were. And that there was a lot of sacrifice created by that. And so if you allow being a lawyer, being executive, being anything like that to sort of define you, then you kind of, I observed at least, that you lose a lot in terms of the other dimensions of life. So I wanted to go off and explore that. And so I eventually did. I decided to take a sabbatical. I stayed on Pixar's board of directors until we sold it to the Disney company. But besides that, I cut all my ties to the world of business and law. And I sat in Palo Alto basically reading books. And I would have been much better off coming here probably for a couple of years, but I tried to do the equivalent. I read very widely throughout, religion and philosophy and Western religion, Eastern religion. And I began to gravitate toward Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist meditation. The reason for that was because I liked what I felt was the underpinning of critical thought that came in what I was perceiving in Buddhist philosophy. I saw what the Buddha was sort of writing about as saying, don't worship me as a god, take me as a signpost, but go figure this out for yourself. And don't be afraid to ask your own questions. And from that idea came this whole body of insight philosophy that basically deconstructs conceptual thought. It's a deconstructive kind of thinking, and I thought that's it. That really drew me in, and then I had a period of being kind of frustrated and cynical. The reason for that is because I was reading these amazing books and these amazing masters writing all this stuff from 1,000 or 1,500 years ago, and I would go and seek that in sort of my community. I felt strongly, and still do, that our sort of spiritual home needs to be where we're at. And it shouldn't be like we have to go to sort of another place or a different culture or a mountain in the Himalayas or something like that. It needs to grow out of where we are. And so I wanted to do my work where I was, which happened to be in California, in Silicon Valley. But I couldn't find it there. I went to the various sort of meditation centers and this and that. And what I saw, at least to me at the time, was a shadow of what I was reading about. So I got kind of cynical, and I thought, maybe you can't engage this kind of work with the kind of depth that I was looking for in the world today. And then I met the man, Hillary and I both together, actually, we met the person who would become our teacher and co-founder of Juniper Foundation. And his name is Segyu Rinpoche, and he's a very highly recognized Tibetan Buddhist master, but he's Brazilian. He's Brazilian born, and he's thoroughly Western in sensibility. And we began to study with him. And when I met him, and it wasn't like kind of lightning bolts went off and, I saw angels dancing on clouds or stuff like that. What I felt was my resistance kind of dropped away. And I felt this is somebody that I could really learn and study with. And that turned out to be a very fruitful journey. And so that, I would say, was the beginning of my real journey into this tradition, probably starting around 2001. And that's how this thing got started.
Thank you. Having heard the hour-long version of that, that was a really good, really good 5 minute.
I know Hillary's sitting there going like, how long is he going to take to say this? So with the two of you, like, I was like, okay, I'm stopping.
I hope that gives you some sense of where Lawrence was coming from. For someone like me who entered the Divinity School as a non-religious person, hearing about Juniper was something really exciting for me. And for those of us who aren't so familiar with Juniper, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what is it that Juniper stands for? What is Juniper offering the world? What does it seek to do?
Well, maybe I'll explain that by just saying how we actually got started. It turned out that Sage Rinpoche also was very interested in bringing this kind of practice into contemporary culture. And I kind of in like a very Silicon Valley bravado way was kind of like, well, I don't know if that's even possible, but why don't we sort of figure it out? Let's get in a room and fill it with whiteboards, because you can't do any startup without whiteboards. We'll fill it with whiteboards and we'll analyze the problem. We'll analyze it kind of like a business case. You know, what would be the strategy for bringing a 2,500-year-old tradition into contemporary life? And we actually did it. He said, okay, let's do it. And so we did it in January of 2003. 5 of us, we became the 5 co-founders of Juniper. We sat in a little room in Palo Alto, we filled it with whiteboards, and we started to ask these questions. You know, questions like, you know, what is the difference between, you know, Eastern culture and Western culture? What is the difference between culture 500 years ago in India and Tibet and contemporary life? What are the underpinnings of monastic life? You know, to what extent is monastic life sort of spiritually mandatory, and to what extent is monastic life kind of culturally and economically and socially sort of imposed? And so we asked all these questions. How would we measure success in this domain? You know, what would it be that, how would we know that this was even worked? So we actually put together this plan. We filled 100 whiteboards, took pictures of them, typed it up, and put that in a spiral-bound book and looked at it. And there we have a business plan for creating a new contemporary meditation tradition built on a 2,500-year-old tradition. I looked at that plan and I was like, there's no way. This is like a 500-year project. Okay? This is just a tall order to do something like this. And I'm used to, like, you know, if you haven't taken your company public in 4 years, forget about it. You're done. And Rinpoche at the time, he said, it is a big project. It won't take 500 years, but maybe it'll take 100 years. And what else are you guys doing? You know, kind of a thing. And this was a really, sort of deep moment, like what to do. And I felt at the time, and I think a lot of my experience in Silicon Valley helped me with this, you know, you kind of can't pick your opportunities sometimes. Like, you more or less have to recognize them when they come your way, and for what they are. It was like that with Pixar. It was like that with my previous company. And here was another one. I was passionately interested in doing this kind of work, but I knew that I couldn't do it alone. I'm going to say Hillary and I both understood that. And one of the ingredients that we needed, besides the time and capacity to do it, was we really felt we needed to be with someone that was an authentic master of this kind of practice. Because otherwise, how would we know where to draw the line? You know, we could read all the books and say something like, you know what, maybe we don't need to prostrate when we enter and begin our meditation, which we don't, by the way. We don't prostrate in our practice. But we didn't want to be the ones to make that decision. And so there I was, like, well, we have this incredible team. We have this incredible master. Maybe we have a shot at this. So that's how it got started. We spent the next 5 years basically in a room together dissecting, like, all these ancient texts and sort of figuring out what are the elements of this that we need, and what are the elements that are sort of culturally relevant to their time and place, but irrelevant today. You know, the most obvious and easy example of that is the role of women. You know, sort of like read any one of these texts, and it's very clear, you know, here are the men and there are the women. Well, question, you know, is that like spiritually like the way the universe works? In which case, hey, you know, that's the way it is. Or is that some cultural artifact from an ancient culture? So to us, it was easy to answer that, easy and obvious. This is a cultural artifact of an ancient culture. We don't need it anymore. So, you know, get rid of it. And so we did that with a number of things like that, looking at monasticism, looking at women, looking at gay rights, you know, those kinds of things. You know, to what extent are these things cultural artifacts? And that took us quite a while to go through all that.
Thank you. This will be my last question, I promise, and then we'll open it up. So the project is clearly one of choosing what to leave behind and what to continue.
Yeah.
You're opening a meditation center in San Francisco. You're going to be creating resources, MP3s, kind of meditation guides that people anywhere can use alone or with other people. What have been the most difficult decisions that you've had to make about where that line is?
Well, I kind of phrase it like this. I kind of put everything going in the world in meditation today into two buckets. One bucket I would call is the bucket of technique. So there's meditation as technique. And so you can learn meditation technique easily. We certainly don't need me or a room like this to talk about meditation technique. Just go to one of 2,400 apps on the App Store, or just plug in, how do I meditate, in the internet, and you'll get like a million options. So you can learn how to meditate easily. It's great, it's important, but that's technique. The other bucket I would probably loosely use a word like connection or lineage or mastery. And that's the bucket that says, well, if you want to learn how to learn meditation, what's more important than the meditation technique is who you're doing meditation with. What is the connection that you have in terms of the school that you're practicing in? That's the bucket that we are trying to create in the world. Is the bucket where, say, when people come to meditate with Juniper, we don't worry that much about the technique. We're interested in forming kind of a connection with something that's deep. Because that's really fruitful. That connection is really helpful for kind of our inner growth. To feel connected to something. And when that something is kind of a profound spiritual lineage of sorts, or meditation lineage, and there are people that have mastery in it, and I can look back to my teacher, and he can look back to his teacher, and he can look back to his teacher, that's a different kind of a practice. And so that's the hardest thing, is not losing sight of that. It's very easy to let technology cloud that notion, when really what I think this has always been about is human connection. Sometimes I pose a hypothetical. I have a hypothetical I do like this. Here's the question. You have two possibilities to learn how to meditate. But you have to pick one. You can't do both. You have to pick one. Possibility number one, there's a person over there, a PhD in a white coat, will connect you to a biofeedback machine and teach you meditation technique. So that's one room over there. Possibility number two is that room over there. In that room over there is a table and 2 cups of tea, like a pot, 2 cups of tea, and sitting on that table is Yoda, like the real live Yoda from the Star Wars films. And so you have to pick. You have to go into the Yoda room once a week for 3 months, or the biofeedback room once a week for 3 months. Which do you choose? Well, a show of hands. Who would want to go hang out with Yoda for 3 months? Right, and who would go to the biofeedback machine for 3 months? It's always the same. It's always the same. Like, who wouldn't want to go hang out with Yoda for a few months? That's the difference. I'm not saying we're creating like the Yoda experience or something like that, but in some ways, that's the kind of experience. Because if you look, I won't get into this now, but if you look really closely at what Yoda was teaching Luke, it really was teaching him all the main elements of what you get from meditation practice.
Great. I've just started watching Star Wars, so this is very...
Film 2, Return of the Jedi.
Right, that's literally, I'm watching it tomorrow. So we just had a lot of story and information, and I know that when I'm listening, I always just take a minute to kind of formulate a question based on that. So I just thought we'd just take 30 seconds of silence just to collect your thoughts before we start articulating some questions. So just take a moment and focus in on what is the bit you want to find out more about. Thank you. So who has a question? Great. Gentleman in the back. Let me give you the... I forgot my duty as microphone man.
Just building on your last 2 points, I was just curious, what do you think is the right way to think about, or how do you think about the relationship between meditation, lineage, and religion, or a particular set of religious beliefs?
That was a challenge. I got the challenging question first. We kind of see what we do like threading the eye of a microscopic needle. And sometimes I think it's really hard to even see where the needle is. Because there are two, at least in the work that we do, we're trying to, in some ways, keep away from two extremes of sort. One side is the side of what I would call religious dogma. And so that's the religion side. And that's where you have a canon of work, whatever it may be, but you take that work as the truth. And so in some ways, many religious traditions are what I would call at least like in the truth business. They say they have something and they take that as truth. And so we, on the other hand, would not see ourselves as in the truth business. And so we want to sort of stay away from notions that we are. We don't see what we do as an ideology. We don't see meditation as a path for ideology. We see it as a methodology. So we want to steer clear of the notion that anything I or we might say is somehow sacred truth. But on the other side is what I would loosely call a kind of like New Age sort of world, which is the sort of dabbling in sort of spiritual notions, but without the sort of depth of a deep connection and power. And so what we try to do is find that spot in the middle. I call it actually like finding, how do you find like depth without dogma? You know, that's the kind of a thing. I suppose if we were to err on one side, you know, we'd probably lean more to where the depth is. You know, because in religious tradition, for sure, there's a lot of depth. Really, you know, amazing stuff. So we know that there's a lot of depth there. In the New Age kind of world, I would say there's less. It's a little more superficial, a little more on the surface. So we'd probably prefer to lean towards the depth. But we really want to find that spot in the middle. And I actually think that's I think in some ways we're all involved in this, because in some ways I think, you know, we didn't invent that idea of the middle. I think that's what the world is kind of looking for, because the world in some ways is beginning to pick up on these ideas of these ends. There's sort of a, you know, people are more prone now to run away from dogma than to run toward it. But people are also getting a little cynical about, you know, the absence of depth, you know, on the one side. So some way, I think we're all involved in this. You know, how do we find this center?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions? Yep. Keep forgetting this. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much. I first want to just say how thrilled I am about what you're doing. I've been doing something like it in the law school, not at your level of depth or breadth, but in classes that I teach and in an open session, which anybody is actually welcome to come to. We're doing another one next Friday on meditation and dialogue, and we do mindfulness meditation and then mindfulness-based discussion after it, and it's open to anyone from the Harvard community. It's over in the law school, in the Morgan courtroom. My question is, I guess it's a three-part question, and you can pick up any one of the three or none of them. But the first one has to do with how you understand the Buddhist, philosophical doctrinal teachings, and in particular, the teaching on no self, which I've thought a lot about. I have thought a lot about it. And I think my view is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about no self. If there's no self, then who is there to practice? Who is there to get liberated? It's not consistent with the Four Noble Truths to say that there's no self. So do you address that. Is that something that's important to you first? Second is about technique. There's a lot of loose talk about technique, meditation, even mindfulness. I've spent a long time trying to figure out exactly what mindfulness is. You hear all of these great benefits promised, the miracle of mindfulness, but if you're not clear on what it is, then you can't really get the benefits of the miracle. I have an idea of what mindfulness is, but I wonder, is your meditation mindfulness? And if it is, specifically, what do you take mindfulness to be? And if not, what is your meditation tradition? Third is about morality. If you're in a Tibetan tradition, then I assume you're in basically a Mahayana tradition, or maybe a Vajrayana tradition, where something like shunyata or voidness, including the voidness of good and evil, that kind of thing, Vimalakirti Sutra, something like that, if you know that text, which to my mind is a critique of early Buddhist moral teachings. And that can have dangers. You can have shunyata, sickness, and do all kinds of things that conventional morality would condemn. But I wonder, what is your understanding of the role of morality or in your work, in your teaching? Any one of those.
They
I'm
didn't
happy to
ask this
take
at the business school. That's great. Thank you.
But there's just no self here to answer that question. So I'm happy to talk about all three because they're all fantastic questions and we think about these things all the time. Yes, we have a strong sort of position and thought about the idea of no self. And we also don't subscribe to the notion, as you put it, like no self really means no self. You know, our reading of this and the way we teach this is not that it's no self. It's that the image that we have of the self, who we are right now, is probably limited in its scope. And so some of the work that we have to do is to deconstruct some of the ways that we see the self. So it's not that there's no self, it's that there's a falsity or an illusory aspect to the self as we know it. There are many, many examples of this because we all in many ways harbor stories in our heads about who we are. One of the strong topics in this that we actually talk about a lot because I think it's a little bit epidemic in contemporary culture is the idea, the notion, for example, of self-esteem. So we all harbor notions of self-esteem that can very often be low and diminish, a sense of who we are. So there's an example of a low self, and we want to dismantle that notion because it's a falsity and it's holding us back. And so we would look at the idea of no self as deconstructing false ideas about the self. And that's the work that we do in that. The second question, just give me 3 words.
Technique,
Technique. Is it mindfulness? Yeah. Yes and no. Strictly speaking, no. Our take on this is that it's a little bit like this. Like, if you want to climb a mountain and get to the top of a mountain, you need to take a path to get up the mountain. There are many different ways to get up a mountain, right? You could take the sheer rock, on one side. You can take the slow meandering path. But when you get to the top, if there's such a thing as the top, but when you get to the top, you certainly will have taken a path. It will have been your path. What we offer is a path. And I would say it's certainly built on the Indo-Tibetan meditation tradition. And the meditations that we offer are very specific and encompass a broad range of topics and ideas. At the beginning, we teach straightforward sort of concentration meditation, focusing on holding the mind on an object, and we have different objects for that. But then we have a collection of meditations, and maybe 50 or so, that engage us in a sort of contemplative styles of meditation. And they're built around 4 topics: meditation itself, balancing the emotions, cultivating compassion, and developing insight. We consider that the sort of building blocks of our practice. Because we believe that even more than mindfulness per se, it's incredibly helpful for us to engage in topics that will sort of help bring about transformation inwardly. It's really helpful to examine like the topic of compassion. So you could say mindfulness could make you more compassionate. Mindfulness could also just make you more mindful at doing, at doing anything. It could make you more mindful at robbing a bank. It's like I'm really mindful now, and I'm going to steal from this bank mindfully. So we looked at all these topics from this tradition, and we just found they fell into these 4 buckets. And so we engage participants in our practice with these specific meditations on those topics. And that forms a path, a way. So I wouldn't be here to say that mindfulness is better or mindfulness is worse or whatever. I don't know about that. I just think there are differences. And I think that one of the dangers in contemporary practice is what I would call the problem of eclecticism, which is that it's very common today. I'm sure you've all experienced this, right? You meet people and they say, things like, wow, I went on this amazing retreat. I had this fantastic time, or I went to this amazing course here and this amazing conference here, and I went to Wisdom 2.0, and it was fantastic. And what we end up doing is kind of collecting sort of meditation and spiritual experiences from different sources. I do a yoga class here, a meditation class here, and this here. And it's all wonderful. But it's all it's all good for us. But it's a little bit like circling the mountain, at the bottom. Eventually, you kind of have to pick something and go, take it up for a little while. That's hard for us to do because we want to be in control. It's like, this is me and I'm directing my whole spiritual life, as opposed to putting myself in the hands of sort of a particular course or a particular path. If you look backwards, you guys, everyone here knows at least as much about this as I do, but I think if you look in the past, you find if you would consider anyone that you would consider to be, a spiritual master, a meditation master, someone you would look up to, they didn't do it that way. Most spiritual teachers and masters would be very proud of the path that they took, the teachers they had, whatever tradition they were part of. Now we've kind of gone the other end of that. And so our take is that it doesn't matter so much which path, but find a path and stick with it for a little while. Then your third question. Morality, yes. So we are based on a Vajrayana tradition, and the morality of that tradition derives from the thesis of the Bodhisattva, I would say. And the Bodhisattva, which is like the Jedi, just when you see the film tomorrow, think Jedi, Bodhisattva, right? It's all pretty much the same thing. The thesis of that is I'm going to engage my spiritual work, my personal path of transformation for the sake of others. And it's that little for the sake of others at the end that brings a different kind of potency to what we do. And so I think, without going into the details, the morality that comes from it is the notion that I'm not in this for myself. It's not like I'm ignoring myself. I'm part of the equation. But my sensitivity, concern, awareness, thoughts about others is going to go up and up and up as I engage this. And I think that's the... Are your moral norms void? I wouldn't say they are void, but I also wouldn't say we sort of have a canon of... This is where, this is a topic we talk about a lot. It gets very tricky here. If you pick any moral norm, I don't know, say being vegetarian or something like that, or, working for a tobacco company or, something like that, it gets very dicey very quickly as to where the sort of line of the morality is. So, no, we don't have a rigid code that says, must do this, must do this, must do that. We rely more instead on that sort of bubbling consciousness, that arising consciousness that is going to sort of naturally take account and consider each situation with concern for the well-being of others.
Thank you. Anybody else? Erica, I saw your hand raising.
I'm really grateful that you brought up the Bodhisattva Bodhisattva way, where you engage in this practice for the liberation of suffering, not just for yourself, but for others as well. So I'm so glad to hear that that's a part of your work, because all too often I feel like it's, oh, well, I'm going to get enlightened and it's all about me, and it's very introspective work, but our liberation is tied up with others too. And so I'm wondering, with the folks that you work with, how do you help them make that shift? Because I think oftentimes in spiritual practice or in seeking, it's because there's something wrong with me, or I want some wholeness, or I want some peace in my life. And how do you help others to they might start with themselves, but to help to expand their awareness? So it's really about all of us seeking liberation from suffering.
I would say slowly. We don't believe in sort of proselytizing that cause. So you don't come into the Juniper and we're like, oh, it has to be about others. I think when you engage and start this kind of practice, it is about you. And I think the Bodhisattva path would say it's about you, because its thesis would be something like, look, we don't arrive at the age of 20 or whenever we feel like we're adults as some sort of fully formed, spiritually mature being. We're constantly, we're just in a constant motion of growth. And we end up with these kind of sort of inner habits, inner patterns, inner stories that can be very self-limiting. These can be emotional patterns, stories we tell ourselves, patterns of thought, the way we perceive ourselves. And so to be more effective in the world, we have to start to iron that out a little bit. And so, but the challenge is that doesn't happen overnight. Meditation is not, in our opinion at least, it's not about peak experiences. It's much more gritty than that. It's much more mundane than that. For us, meditation is all about how are you living your life in the world, right? How are you when, that person that always touches a raw nerve in you, like, can you get a little better at dealing with that, right? Can you make it so that it takes a little more to trigger you? Can you make it so that when your emotions are triggered in that situation, they don't last as long, or they dissipate, more quickly? Because you know how it is, right? Well, you can look at your cell phone and see the caller ID of someone that's calling you, and a cascade of emotions just arises just from that alone. So to be effective in anything, to be effective, I would say, in the ways we're talking about. So to be effective in the ways of bringing more clarity and more calm and more joy and ease and more positive energy to everything we do, we have to work on these kind of inner patterns. And that takes time because they've been there for a while. And so we work with people, very patiently. We just say, let's start meditating together. And we go through this sequence of meditations. We're going to have all this online, by the way, in about 3 months. But we have a sequence of maybe 50 or so practices that engages the mind in these ideas. Compassion, insight, balancing emotions, and gets us to engage with this. And over a period of years engaging with this, we'll really start to change as human beings. It's fascinating, you start to talk about compassion. There's so many sides and elements to it. Is there such a thing as compassion without any self-interest? What's the connection between, compassion and pity? What does it mean to be skillfully compassionate? How do you know what to do? How do you know how to help someone? Should you hold back? Should you step forward? Should you be with them? Should you let them be? And does your mind become impatient, as you're trying to be compassionate to someone and they're not responding the way you want? So these are all the kinds of topics that we explore both in, talks like this and retreats, but also in our meditation to sort of increase our awareness about these things so we get more skillful in the world. But I think without patiently, doing that kind of inner work at the same time, we don't jump straight to, I'm a Jedi and I'm saving the world.
We'd promised a conversation about the role of meditation in corporations, so I'm going to ask that question if that's all right. You're being approached by large, Fortune 100 firms saying, please bring this to us.
Yeah.
We've tried, Google's program, we've tried this program, and it's not what we want. Maybe it's you. Are you going to say yes?
I'm going slowly again. On the we are going slowly, and I'll tell you why. I think that the corporations are sort of just beginning to sort of get on this kind of meditation bandwagon, you know, and so especially some out in Silicon Valley, they want to offer this kind of thing to their people, but they don't really know how to do it. That's my sense. They don't know how to do it. So they're going around and they'll look at Search Inside Yourself and they'll try Headspace and they'll go to John Kabat-Zinn and they'll sort of look at all these things, but they're really none the wiser for it. They don't really know what to do. And that's fine. It's new. It's going to take a while to figure out, you know, how and whether corporations should introduce meditation to their employees. And I have two feelings about it. You know, there's a trend now, especially out in Silicon Valley in a way, where corporations are becoming a little bit like the old company town. You know, now the corporations are going to do everything for you. You know, 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? You know, like when Hillary and I started, like no one was offering us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was like, if you can make a peanut butter sandwich before you leave the house, then you'll have lunch.
Yeah.
But now, and I've been to these corporations, this is amazing. Should bring this to the divinity
Right.
school, by the way.
Need some help with budget.
You're talking about, you know, staffs of chefs, you know, that are like making this incredible food, right? And so it's 3 meals a day, it's exercise, it's meditation, it's everything. In many ways, engaging a path of meditation is to take us beyond the conventions and routines of our daily life. In other words, that's what the whole thing is for, because the thesis of our meditation practices, I would see it, is that we're just in this groove in our life. We're just going 100 miles an hour down the highway, and we're in these grooves. We can't necessarily even tell we're in these grooves until we sort of get out and look at it. But because we're going so fast, we can't even get out and look at it. Well, that's what meditation is for. You know, just take 10 minutes a day to sit. It doesn't even matter what you do. Just like take 10 minutes a day to sit. And I actually think, by the way, that's the hardest part of meditation. I think if you find 10 minutes a day to just sit, like the rest is easy. It's finding the 10 minutes. Because, you know, we're just going so fast. But if you find 10 minutes a day and your attitude is, this is my personal sanctuary. This is my space. This is my spot. This is like the time when, at least for this 10 minutes, the rest of the world, you know, I sort of push aside. It's going to come pressing back in, but for this 10 minutes, I can do this work inwardly. So meditation is about taking us beyond the sort of these grooves of our lives and taking us beyond the grooves of corporate life. So there's something, you know, a little disconcerting when it's sort of the corporation, you know, sort of delivering that kind of thing. That's the one side. The other side to it, on the other hand, it's a fantastic way to get exposed to it, because you could reach, you know, tons and tons and tons of people. So I think the short answer to this question is that we will experiment with it and learn from it. I will not call it our highest priority, though. There are startups in Silicon Valley now, one or two at least, I would say it's their highest priority. They are marketing startups that are bringing mindfulness and meditation into large corporations. And we will not try to compete with that. And so we will do something sort of small in our own way, and we'll learn from that.
And also because a lot of those startups, that's the market, right? That's who pays them. So it's hard to avoid that.
No, but we could do a mindfulness startup. I know how to do that too. Like,
with plus 2,500 years of experience, that's
Yeah.
a good mix. Any other?
yeah.
Just a
Yeah.
follow-up.
Yeah.
So are you concerned?
Forgive me, Laura.
Are you concerned both about that the idea behind meditation or a path that's connected to a lineage, something with depth, is supposed to actually encourage someone to look at their life critically, which may mean leaving the corporation? Or are you concerned about what is their intention behind bringing this in? Is it an ethical concern or a little bit of both?
No, it's probably more the former one. It's not that everyone should do meditation and think about leaving their job or something like that. But maybe there's one person in the room, right, in that corporate meditation that is an issue for them, right? They're feeling burdened, they're feeling this, they're feeling that, and that is the issue that they want to work out. So if they come to meditate, with Juniper or any sort of independent thing, that's exactly why they're there. is to kind of work out those conflicts. So so if I were teaching meditation, or any of us were teaching meditation in a corporate environment, and we can sense that sort of bubbling up, how easily and readily can we go there? Again, I don't have a yes or no answer to it. I think we have to work it out. I do think at the end of the day, if someone has a real meditation practice, I think it's the spiritual dimension of their life, and I don't think it's going to be necessarily the work dimension of their life as well. It's hard to make those two things line up in sort of in one place. So there's role for meditative life in being in a corporation. That's for sure. But we'll learn about this in the coming years.
Yeah, we'll follow the journey. I had a question over here.
Thank you for being who you are. You're a true inspiration.
Well, thank you.
I'm Lillian Chung from the Harvard T.H. Chang School of Public Health. And I have actually been studying with Thich Nhat Hanh for 18 years.
Yeah.
And was instrumental in bringing him to Google in 2011 and started mindful eating with Google.
Yes.
And now we at the School of Public Health is having a mindful eating corner to help people to really pause and regain some stillness during the lunch hour. My question to you is, with all your experience with corporations, what are the key factors that will facilitate the adoption of mindfulness practice at work? Because I am actively being sought after by major corporations through the National Business Group on Health, which works with Fortune 500 companies in terms of trying to improve health.
This is something we're looking at too. I mean, I think the short answer is to sort of offer a program that is that individuals can come to and connect to. I think one of the challenges with this kind of work is getting people to stick to it. I think it's pretty easy to get 50 or 100 people in a room, and I'm going to teach you how to meditate, and it sounds great. Except like 5 minutes into your meditation and mindfulness practice, you kind of be like, I'm just not feeling particularly blissful right now, right? Anything but. And so meditation, a lot of times, isn't that much fun, because you sit down, your mind goes wherever, on an object, whatever the meditation practice is, and it's just not there. It's just not present. I had a funny story about this. Someone came to meditate with us. This was like 3 weeks ago. There was probably a dozen of us in the room, and this was someone new. So he raised a hand at the end and said, boy, it was really hard for me to keep my mind on the object during that practice. It was kind of frustrating. So I just said to everyone there who'd been meditating for a long time, I said, raise your hand if you had a difficult time keeping your mind on the object. And then I said, welcome to the land of terrible meditators. I don't think we sort of get into meditation to be great meditators, any more than going to although we idealize this a little bit. We have this sense that, because it's funny, as soon as you see someone sit down and they're in the meditation posture, they're looking in that, lotus position, all this. As soon as you see someone like that, you think that they must be really peaceful. That outer image that you have is completely wrong. It's rare. And so we have to lead people into this practice, I think, and I think the challenge is how to sustain them. We address that with a collection of different kinds of meditation, which I'm happy to share, where we engage people not just in concentrating on an object, but using different kinds of topics. Some people prefer some to the other. Some people like the concentration, some people like wrestling with different topics, but at least the collection of both provides some richness to the experience. And I think we'll need that kind of a thing to sort of hook, hold people in. But this is a great discussion. We could continue, which would be great.
I know I have one question here, and then we'll return to the other side of the room.
Hi. So I appreciated what you said about your spiritual home needing to be where you are. is that it makes sense intuitively, but it's not something that I'd ever thought about. And I was interested in some of what you said about trying to bring meditation in culturally into sort of the space that you're in. I'm from Silicon Valley, actually, from Sunnyvale. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of the other ways that you do that. And I'm also curious, you use the example of a person in a lab coat versus Yoda with tea. And I think all of us would choose Yoda, but I also wonder if you leave the tea on the table, but you take Yoda away and you have a white guy in Dockers named Bob, or somebody of East or South Asian descent wearing robes who has a name that you don't recognize in your language. I won't ask the question, but I think we see a lot of people choosing or conflating in a way the exotic with the spiritual. So I'm wondering if that's a conversation that you've had at Juniper, especially considering that I think especially Asian American image is an important conversation in Silicon Valley.
It's one of my favorite topics. There are two dimensions to that topic. And I think this is one of the sort of the perceived greatness of an enlightened being. And I think we see ourselves as because the challenge, what happens then is that the practice falls right back into the religious mode. Right now what I'm doing is basically in the mode of kind of worshiping a perceived enlightened being. And so it's like, save me. You know the answers for me, right? So save me. And I think we have a decent history of that not working very well. It's really important we have to have this balance. It's really important to kind of think for ourselves, I think, on our path, and be open to other possibilities, but not suspending both. And so if we stop thinking for ourselves and just tell me, then I think that's a danger, and that's the danger of that imagery. We also have which is one of my absolute favorite topics, the notion of what I would call like the self-proclaimed guru. So this is like really, hot today. So all of a sudden, like I've had some success and I've studied and I've taken a class or two, I'm now a teacher. And that's without going through the kind of, practice that many teachers do go through. As for your first question about work and corporate life, I face this a lot in my own corporate life, which is how can you practice things that we're talking about here in what is a very harsh environment, a very harsh, very competitive, very brutal environment. And I faced this a lot in my own career because I was the chief financial officer of a public company. I was in charge of the bottom line. It was my job to report to Wall Street, and Wall Street really doesn't care how much you meditate or anything like that. But for me, it was always that aspect to it was always very easy. It was easy and obvious to me that basically human beings come first. The respecting kind of the dignity of other human beings in corporate life, to me, was easy to say that comes first. And I found that didn't diminish my capacity to make harsh decisions, fire people, because you have anything you're involved in, you'll have people that aren't performing right, that are misbehaving, maybe they're stealing blame from the company, and you have to take harsh action. But I think that whatever action you have to take, you can always take it with dignity and compassion. So even if I'm firing somebody, who was misbehaving and turning the whole company upside down, you can still remember there's a human being there. And the old Jedi model is like, if you're a Jedi, a real Jedi, we keep coming back to Jedis, Casper, you're like, you've got a sword. Well, they don't have a sword, right? They have a lightsaber, right. Sometimes you've got to pull out your lightsaber and use it. But it doesn't, mean there's a huge difference between using your lightsaber with kind of strength and compassion and with aggression and anger. And it's the same outcome. And I think the decision that we have to make, to which one we want to be, is a very simple one. It's who do we want to be? Who do you want to be, in your life? And I think that's the question for people. And I think many, many people in corporations are afraid of being that person because they equate strength, they equate sort of they kind of have a sense that you've got to be a warrior. You kind of got to be harsh and strong and aggressive to be effective. And you don't. It's just harder to do it the other way. It doesn't take a lot of self-discipline to run a company like a jerk. It takes a lot of self-discipline and a lot of self-awareness to run a company in the ways that we're talking about here. But you have to want to do it. Both whether you're running a company or it doesn't matter. Even if you're just in a company, you don't have to be running it. Just being a person. How are you relating to the people around you? And I think these are challenges that we could teach a lot on. That's why, in some ways, it's about more than mindfulness per se. It's about a way of being, and how do we offer and teach that?
I want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to have one more question. And Lawrence, I'm going to cut you short if you if it goes on too long. If that's all right.
Hi, thank you so much for coming in to talk with us today. My name is Wen, and I am my third year of study at the undergraduate. I'm also from San Francisco, so I'm very thrilled to find out that such a great institution like Juniper is in my hometown. So, to start off with my question, based on just anecdotes that I've collected, the people who have eventually adopted the practice of meditation in their lives tend to be extremely driven people who have done very well for themselves in their careers, but eventually came to the realization that success in career was not the thing that made them the happiest. So that's why they turn to the meditation to, kind of like reach back to themselves and also feel connected to the others. So because of this, there's like a association of, adopting the practice of meditations and also choosing to kind of like withdraw from your career to a degree. And this kind of like creates a conflict in my mind, because even though I really want to like feel connected to myself and others while I lead my life, there's still some destination or goals in my life that I still want to achieve. So I was just curious to know, how does practicing meditation impact your level of drive or ambitions in your life?
I would say it didn't impact it at all. Maybe it should have. Our experience, by the way, at Juniper, we have people coming to meditation from all walks of life. And it's certainly not people that have just been successful and want to kind of, maybe we could use a few more of those actually. But we have people from all walks of life, single moms raising children and people going through difficult, illnesses, and people that just want to learn more about, life's possibilities and such. So I do think it comes from anywhere. I do not think there's any inconsistency between ambition and meditation, because I think that our meditation, our spiritual life, is not conditioned on a particular outcome. So it's not something that says, well, if you want to be a great meditator, you have to live in a cave, or you have to live in a mountain, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. Go be great in the world. That is, to me, the message of meditation. To me, that's the message of the Buddha, the message of the Bodhisattva. Be great in the world. So if you want to be a surgeon, you want to be a teacher, you want to be a community builder, you want to be a software programmer, you want to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, go be great at it. It's just that if you do it with this kind of, energy pulsing from within you, then it'll be way better. And when you look back at it, you're going to feel way better about having done it. So, another way to think of it is that I don't think meditation changes things at the level of personality. So if you're a really driven person, you're still going to be a really driven person. It's not, what it's changing is the unhealthy aspects of it. So it's one thing to be driven. It's great to be driven, actually. But it's another thing to be so attached to it that your life collapses at the mere thought of not succeeding. That's a different thing altogether. So the challenge is be driven and go for it. But then wherever you go, sort of understand that's where you got to. Don't let it, collapse you. Keep going. Pardon? That's where I would say if you practice with Juniper, I think you could, by the way. In other words, I think that, there's two sides to everything. And I think a great sniper in the world might have an unbelievable meditative mind. So I wouldn't say it was like black magic and white magic. They're two sides of the same coin. It's like Darth Vader and Luke.
It's as if the film meant something.
Darth Vader is the incarnation of great power and great capacity and great focus, but to the false end. I think that's where, but if you come to Juniper, right, we're going to be talking about compassion and what it means, and we're going to be doing meditations where you learn to put yourself in the shoes of others. The famous Tibetan exchange yourself with others, right? What does it feel like? And we teach how do you suspend your judgment over others and start to begin to generate empathy. So I would think that might quell the sniper instinct a little bit.
Depends who you're shooting. I guess that's the...
Yeah. It does depend who you're shooting. This is a really great question. If we had the situation, right here in Boston. There, you have, terrorists, coming here. You need a great sniper, and so you want that person to be a great, compassionate sniper.
What a note to end on. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you short there just because it's 35 past. Thank you so much, Erica and Bob, Angie, everyone else who was involved in organizing it. I'm sorry the food did not appear, but I hope you were fed in other ways. Oh, it's out in the hall. How wonderful. You get to be fed in some ways as well. Please do hang around if you have further questions. Lawrence is happy to hang around for a bit, as is Hillary, who will be able to answer questions equally well. Thank you so much for being here. It's really wonderful to have so many people and such wonderful questions. So thank you, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you for having me, too. It's a privilege. Thank you.